Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees, the spirit of nature, the spirit of Gaia, I want to welcome all of you to the 428th session of Humanity Rising. Today is our second in 5 programs on the very important issue of democracy. As we've noted, we're in a world now of multiple code reds. We have code reds in the climate. We have a code red in Ukraine right now. We have a code red in democracy, because unless we preserve our democratic institutions, we won't be able to solve the multiple problems and challenges that are confronting humanity in a way that is shaping our future with escalating turbulence and escalating complexity, in the face of which our governments are very hard pressed to ensure the kind of normalcy that we have come to expect in our world. Today is International Women's Day. And so on this day, as we contemplate both the challenges and the crises and the democratic impulse around the world, we want to delve into the issue of women and democracy. So that will be our theme today. Before we venture into that domain, let us take a moment and let us pause, as we always do, and for just the next minute, let us attune ourselves to our hearts. And let us, in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving, connect through our hearts with everyone everywhere striving for democracy in our world. Thank you, everyone. And now let us dive in to this second program on democratic challenges in our world. I want to introduce now George Caponelli, who, along with Shelley Alcorn, has been convening this 5-day program. So George, welcome to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank Humanity Rising for continuing to bring these extraordinary programs to the world that are so absolutely necessary. I'm also grateful that we have this opportunity today to be witness to and hear the wisdom and intelligence of 4 remarkable women who you'll meet very shortly. Before we do, I just want to remind everyone, as Jim did, that these democracy dialogues are a kind of call to action, a prayer, a plea to everyone who values both the promise and the opportunity of democracy, and who recognize that it is so under such threat and challenge at this time in our history. I also want to accent something that Jim said, that literally from the start of the International Women's Day in 1900, democracy, women's rights, and human rights have been inextricably involved. And indeed, if we look at the history of elections across the United States, when women began to have the right to vote, since then they have played absolutely critical and essential, and sometimes the differentiating factor in almost every election. So that was clear certainly in 2020, when in a lot of the swing states, the margin of victory was so small. And women not only voting, but playing incredibly important roles in the election process itself make a difference. And now as we move toward 2020, that 2022 rather, that situation is even more important. As I did yesterday, I want to ask us all a question, or two really. Are we really prepared to do what is necessary to save democracy? And then the second question is, what can we do individually and collectively, men and women, but today especially women? What can you do differently or more of to make 2022 a success in keeping the encroachment of autocracy and its limitations from overcoming us? And so before I step away, I wanted to read some lines from Alice Walker that I think have a lot to do with the conversation today and the conversation that women have been having and will continue to have in the days ahead. This is from her piece, Democratic Womanism, and it goes like this, just a chunk of it. I want something else, a different system entirely, one not seen on this earth for thousands of years, if ever. Democratic womanism. Notice how the word has man right in the middle of it. The one reason I like it. That's one reason I like it. He's right there, front and center, but he's surrounded. I want to vote and work for a way of life that honors the feminine, a way that acknowledges the theft of the wisdom female and dark mother leadership might have provided our spaceship all along. I'm not talking about a talking head kind of gal, happy to be mixing it up with the baddest bad boys on the planet, her eyes a slit, her mouth a zipper. No, I'm speaking of true regime change, where women rise to take their place en masse at the helm of Earth's frail and failing ship, where thousands of years of our silence is examined with regret and the cruel manner in which our values of compassion and kindness have been ridiculed and suppressed and brought to bear on the disaster of this present time. The whole thing is very well worth reading, and I encourage you to do that. It's called Democratic Womanism by Alice Walker. And now I turn it over to four extraordinary women, and we'll very much enjoy the conversation. Shaina?
Thank you so much, George, for that beautiful poem. Thank you, Jim Garrison, for this platform, for Humanity Rising, for all the people watching today. It is such an honor to be here. My name is Shayna Connors, and I'm here alongside Lauren Walsh, and we are the stewards of the Global Sisterhood movement. We're a movement of women around the world gathering in over 100 countries to come together to heal and to remember who we are. and we do that together in Sisterhood. And so the conversation today is about the rise of the feminine in democracy, and how this change can lead to a new time on Earth. So I want to introduce Lauren Walsh, who is the creator of this movement that was birthed over 7 years ago on this day, International Women's Day. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Humanity Rising. I feel honored to be here with all of you today. I feel honored to be a part of this conversation that feels vital in our times. I want to thank all of the women that came before us, all of the women that we are celebrating on this day, the women who fought and spoke when it was dangerous to speak, the women who have put their lives on the line so that we could have this conversation safely, so that platforms like this, where women's voices, women's wisdom, women's intuition can be honored. Growing up in this world as a young girl, I had a difficult time loving myself. I internalized, like so many of us do, the pain of the world, the internalized patriarchal mindsets of the world. And I subjugated my own internal feminine nature. I doubted my intuition, I doubted my voice, I judged my body, and I felt as if I couldn't trust my fellow sisters. And as I grew and went on an exploration of how I could feel like I belong here on this planet, and how I could be safe here and be who I really am here on this planet, what I found was sisterhood, authentic spaces where women could come, take off our masks, share what's happening on deep levels inside of ourselves, and also share what wisdom we're gaining from this, began to transform my life. And that is the basis of the Global Sisterhood movement. We help women facilitate these conversations, bringing back wisdom councils and spaces of healing for us all. And I believe in this conversation about democracy, that these spaces for us to have women's wisdom, not just our wisdom and our capacity to do it like men have done before, but to also bring forth a new energy to how we lead and how we have these conversations. Conversations where empathy and deep listening are involved. And so with that being said, I just wanted to invite us all to take a moment before we dive in with our wonderful guests and teachers today, to just present ourselves in this moment in the world. This moment that is, as Jim was saying, already in the red zone. And also inviting the feminine principle of death, rebirth, and regeneration into our hearts and minds. It seems as though an old way is dying. And so how can we be the birthers of the next phase of humanity, the new? And so with this exploration, this reality of an old system crumbling and a new one that is yet to be reborn, that's being born through every one of us, we host this conversation today with this hope, with this faith, and also with the seriousness of the present times. And with that, I invite us all to take one collective breath. And we'd like to welcome Anne Baring and Juanita Roberson to the conversation today.
So before I go ahead and introduce you both, it is such an honor to have these women here today. They are truly legends in the spaces that they lead, and they're doing the deep work to really bring remembrance to all of us. And so I'll first introduce Anne, followed by Juanita. Anne is going to share a poem. Anne Baring is an Oxford historian, Jungian analyst. She's a brilliant woman that was far before her time. And she has given us really a deep understanding of what happened to the feminine. Throughout history, there was a story where the feminine was lost. This essence was lost. It was forgotten in all of us. And she has brought forth the wisdom for it to be remembered. And so it is such an honor to introduce Anne Baring. Thank you so much for being here, Anne.
Thank you so much, Shana. Appreciate that. Would you like me to read my poem now, or will you introduce Juanita first?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and have you read your poem, and then we'll pass it over to Juanita.
Okay, lovely. This is a prayer to the Holy Spirit that I wrote for the millennium, but I've adapted for today. As we watch the human catastrophe unfolding in Ukraine, may the Holy Spirit of wisdom awaken us to a deeper sense of our relationship with the earth, with each other, and with the hidden dimensions of life still veiled from our sight. May her light and love shine through our hearts and illumine our minds. May she help us to become aware of the oneness and sacredness of life and to care for our neighbor as ourself. May she inspire us to be protectors rather than destroyers of life. May the souls of those whose lives have been brutally extinguished be released from the terror, grief, loneliness, and despair in which they died. May she help us to recognize and transform evil and to respond to the torment of all persecuted peoples as if it were our own. May she help us to see that evil is the willingness to inflict terror, pain, humiliation, torture, or death on other human beings. May she heal those who are unable to love and who carry a deep wound caused by intolerable suffering in childhood. May they be released from the compulsion to inflict pain and suffering on others. May she free us from bondage to political and religious fanaticism, whose devastating legacy we witness today. May she guide us to call for leaders who serve the true needs of all peoples and all species on this planet. May she help us to find the courage and determination to restrain the greed that is destroying the Earth's ecosystem and exploiting its resources for the sole benefit of our species. May she inspire us to offer our lives in service of the great web of living relationships that is her life and the life of the cosmos. May she give us the humility, wisdom, strength, and compassion to accomplish the great work of transmuting our nature from base metal into gold. I'd also like to read a short poem written in 1951, but absolutely relevant for this time. It's called A Sleep of Prisoners. The human heart can go the length of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul men ever took. Affairs are now soul size. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake. But will you wake for pity's sake?
Do whatever you want to do, Adana, period.
Thank you, Anne, for that
Giving
beautiful
garlic
prayer and that beautiful poem.
and onions, but I can have something separate,
George, I think you might need to mute your mic.
period.
Beautiful.
So now we would like to introduce Juanita Roberson, who has become a friend and a teacher to us, someone who we deeply admire and respect. She is a wise woman, a coach, a consultant whose work is focused on healing the embedded trauma within us and within our system. She leads a rites of passage program to initiate adults so that we can be mature, healthy adults stewarding our world towards a healthy direction of forgiveness and reconciliation. She is the author of The Innerground Railroad and so much more. Juanita, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I realized that I met you and Shayna a year ago today. And so how wonderful to be back together with you two today. Thank you. And I want to start by just welcoming in the ancestors. And I'm going to do that through Bea Richards. Bea Richards is the woman who played everybody's Black mama in the day. So guess who's coming to dinner? She was the actress who played that position, as well as a bunch of others during that time. And she was a dancer and an actress and a poet and this wonderful woman. And she created this poem called A Black Woman Speaks of White Womanhood, White Supremacy, and Peace. And I just want to read just a small piece of it because I think it fits with where we're going today. She writes, a Black woman speaks of white womanhood, white supremacy, and of peace. It is right that I, a woman Black, should speak of white womanhood. My fathers, my brothers, my husbands, my sons die for it, because of it. And their blood chilled in electric chairs, stopped by hangman's noose, cooked by lynch mob's fires, spilled by white supremacists' mad desire to kill for profit gives me that right. I would that I could speak of white womanhood as it will and should be, when it stands tall in full equality, but then womanhood will be womanhood, void of color and of class, and all necessity for my speaking thus will be past, gladly past. So I let her open the door for me as I show up in this space, and I just, believe what Maya Angelou spoke about, I come as one, but stand as 10,000. And I'm just so grateful to be here, and I hope that what I speak gives them honor. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Juanita. So Juanita and Anne, we would like to start by asking you both a question, and I'll start with you, Juanita. What is most alive on your heart in relationship to the feminine rising and democracy and where we are right now in this moment?
I think for me, it is initiation. I like, this past year, one of the elders that transitioned was Robert Bly. And one of the things that he writes in Iron John about men's rites of passage is that men have to have two births, one by a female mother and one by a male mother. And so it speaks to the feminine. It speaks to the feminine is where we all get initiated through. It's how we grow up. And I personally think that we could solve every issue on the planet if we initiated all the adults. I think we each come with a unique genius to solve an issue here, and it's actually our most underutilized resource that we have.
Thank you. I agree with that. And what is most alive on your heart in relationship to the feminine rising and democracy today?
I think what is in my heart at the moment is deep grief that we're in the situation that we are, what we're witnessing, and the helplessness of the feminine voice in relation to the male voice, which is dominating the situation at the moment. There is absolutely nothing that we can do except in the internal sense, inwardly, and with prayer and with hope. But on the other hand, one can see from the way the women in Ukraine are behaving, what they're doing. First of all, they're saving the life of the children. They're exiting into other countries in Europe who are opening their arms to help them. This is the feminine. This is generosity. This is compassion. And this is truth. We're seeing the truth of people's lives, what is most important to them, which is freedom. And you can't have democracy without freedom, or freedom without democracy. So this is paramount in my thoughts at the moment, how to increase the participation of women so this can never happen again. And how can women it's not exactly have a platform, but women organize themselves. For instance, if all the mothers in the world got together and said, we will not tolerate our sons being killed anymore, sacrificed in these ridiculous wars. So those are my thoughts at this moment.
Thank you, Anne. It also brings to mind the way that all women, we need to remember our voices and the power of our voices, and that we have something to say, and that we can express this deep grief and sadness and anger that exists because it's real. And in order for a true democracy to work, we have to realize who we are. So we know what we stand for, we know what our values are. And so I really appreciate that share, and thank you. I have a question for you both. If the feminine is to play a role in democracy, of course, there's this element of being, right? And this is for men and women everywhere. And this being is perhaps paramount to this idea of doing, how we be when we're interacting with others, how we be when we are working through conflict, when we're working through the polarization that's happening across democratic lines. So can you speak about how we step into this feminine essence, how we really honor this essence in order to be in a democratic system?
Well, I think we have to, first of all, be aware of the need to do what you just said, the need to be in a state of, first of all, calmness, having the capacity to look within ourselves and see what is coming up, which might interfere with the relationship that we're creating with whoever we're speaking with or whoever we're engaging with, so that we have an objective view of the relationship between two people or two countries or whatever it might be, two people negotiating for peace at the moment, for instance. So being is a quality that can only be developed through long contemplation and quietness. You can't be just stuck on like a hat. You have to prepare to know what being is and enter into it. And then from that place, then you can act, then you can do, then you can speak what truth you want to speak, and you can engage with the other person from a place of compassion and from a place of wisdom, not from the place of trying to overcome the other and cancel the other out because you don't like the sound of his or her voice. So that's very important. The training into being is a long training. And I think you're aware of it, which is wonderful.
I think, I knew we were going to be speaking a little bit about the difference between being and doing. And so I went and looked up, it's one of the reasons that I welcomed in Bea Richards, because she said she practiced the state of, in her acting, the state of being. And one of the things she gives as a definition for being is mortal existence in a complete and perfect state, lacking no essential characteristic. Everything you need, you got. Perfect. Maybe not yet realized, but perfect, complete. And so this piece of like that space of like, how do we show up and just get present to ourselves and in the moment? That how do I bring me in the room? And I will connect it to Shana. You just spoke about the grief that's there and that we get to be in when it's present. And I think we've lost the understanding of the connection between compassion and grief. If we're not doing our own grief work, our compassion is very shallow. It has no depth. And so each of us would think we're pretty compassionate people, and to a certain extent, we would be right. But unless we're doing our own work, because we are connected, if I don't have a particular level of compassion and love for myself, there's no way I can give it to you. And I think we can. We think I can have lots of compassion for you and not have it for me. But the problem with that is I can't know what you need. All I can know is what I need in that moment. And if I really get that we're connected, then it is in service to you. And I think we've just forgotten that.
Yes, I think that's important.
Would you like to say more there, Anne?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. Beautifully put.
I agree. And I'd like to go a little deeper into this. Based on the story that I shared earlier about this inner division and inner subjugation of my own feminine based on the input from the patriarchal paradigm all around, present in our world, present in the values, present in our systems. And everyone has a version of that because we live in this imperfect world and it imprints upon our consciousness and we relate to ourselves and the other with that. And when I think about democracy, and I think about especially lately, and you touched on this with canceling each other out, having conversations with extreme points of views, there seems to be this, absolute inability to have compassion or empathy or understanding for the other. And as you were saying, Juanita, that comes from a lack of compassion in ourselves. And I'm curious about this inner division that has taken place in humanity, perhaps with the severance of masculine and feminine principles, and what we can do to not only bring ourselves back into union, but bring red and blue and all of these, polarities back into a harmonious conversation.
I think that one of the major problems with the projection of our own unconscious contents onto others and attacking them out there, so to speak, is that there is no third element. You have you and the person you're speaking to, but there's no third element. And the third element is the feminine. It's a relationship. And also, we need the relationship with something beyond ourselves to hold both of us in a position where we can have a dialogue without attacking each other. But if there's no third element, say for me, it's either the earth or the cosmos that I'm holding as the ground of whatever thing I'm talking about. If that's missing, there's nothing to really share with the other person at a very, very deep level. You can't really get into the field between two people if you don't know that it exists. And this is something that I'm sure Juanita would agree with me. It comes with maturity. It comes when we really grow up. And we live in an adolescent culture, as I think somebody has said quite rightly, because there's no rite of passage to get people past adolescence. And in other cultures, there has been that. And there was that in the last war, 2 wars of the last century, because people had to grow up to face the very terrible situation that we were in. But there has been peace for a very long time and people have just gone to sleep. And so also when they're frightened, when people are frightened unconsciously, they're angry and they project that anger onto their opponent and fight it out with them, so to speak, instead of looking at their own inner aggression and where it's coming from and their own distress. So I think that's my contribution on that.
One of the jobs that I was hired to do is to help to design listening circles for rural and small town America after President Trump was elected. And what they did was they found the 20 counties across the country that had voted for Obama twice and then Trump the next election. And they wanted us to listen for what were the themes between race, immigration, and religion. And it was interesting because I was working with the Progressive Party. And what struck me is how both sides are just reflecting each other. They just do it in very different ways. Because the only thing that we can call to us is us. That's what it means to be connected. But I think that we're not asking when we come together, what is this? What's the gift in this for me? What is it trying to bring me? Because we so think that the world is out to get us and not to gift us. But when we change, we ask different questions, and so we can meet it differently. Now, with that being said, my partner is a white Canadian man who lives in Utah, who was a practicing Mormon for years, and we clash a lot. And one of the things this last time that really struck me is I think sometimes where the clash comes isn't just what we think is the hatred, I think sometimes the clash is because we can feel the pain of the other person and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to hold it ourselves. We don't know, we're not teaching people how to hold their own emotions, let alone someone else's. And so we get into this, and it looks like, it can even show up as anger, because I think anger is unfelt personal grief and rage is unfelt communal grief. And so and trauma wants to be healed, so it'll always keep bubbling to the surface.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to talk about trauma and how it is important in our democratic systems to have democratic leaders that do their own inner work. And this is something that has not really been talked about that often, but is of the utmost importance. Because if you were to have a leader that has done their internal work, knows how to listen, has compassion for oneself, therefore can have compassion for others, like, this is what needs to happen. You can look around at the leaders of today who are doing terrible things like Putin, and you can see the trauma that this man carries. You can feel it. And so how do we start to train our leaders? How do we start to help people heal? How do we learn to really come together in the knowing that we all carry something? And so I'm curious about both of your answers on how we start to make it normalized, and also to ensure that our leaders are taking care of their inner work.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to kind of change the focus a bit. I think we give so much power to these leaders, but they're just reflecting us. And it's easy to put it on them instead of us doing our own healing, so that then our leaders reflect a different us, but in some ways that lets us off the hook, that it's them. But they couldn't do it by themselves. Trump didn't elect himself. There are lots of people who voted for him. And so to me, that's the piece that I think when we talk about power, so often we're only talking about positional power, and internal power is so much more important, because external power changes when conditions change. Internal power, you keep it forever. The other thing that I would add around time, and I think, Anne, you mentioned this around war and adolescence, is, in December, Melodoma Somé transitioned as well out of this earth plane. And one of the things that he said is the West has chosen to do initiation through trauma, because the soul knows it needs to be initiated. And so the soul knows it needs to meet itself. And so it'll call up conditions time and time again to try to initiate itself. And war is one of the ways that cultures do that. It's a way to initiate a big group of men all at once.
Yes, but at what a price?
Yes, I agree. And I think we've insisted on it, though. When we don't listen, when it's like the whispers, it has to get tighter and tighter and tighter.
I think it goes back to looking back over 4,000 years. We've had this pattern repeating itself over and over and over again in every continent and every country. There's no exceptions at all, except with the indigenous peoples. But the key word is power, because all along, going back through those 4,000 years, people have elected or had forced upon them men who were only interested in power, because they saw that as the sole means of survival in the world, first of all. And the more powerful they were, the more they felt secure, and the more they were separated probably from their inner traumas. So this is a key word which we really have to go into, I think. Jesus actually called it the, what did he call it? The something of the world, the master of the world. Power is the master of the world, i.e. when we fall under its power, we go unconscious. We get sucked into the old instinctive pattern of survival, and this gets more and more powerful in us until we can't think of anything else. And Putin is a very good example of that, because he wants power over really the whole world, which shows how deeply insecure he is within. There's no trust anywhere, no trust in life, no trust in himself. So these leaders have come up because the people are also feeling frightened and needing a strong leader to protect them, have always voted these people into power. Or anyway, they've put up with them. But now has come a time where we can't go on with this anymore. We have to change the pattern somehow. We have to change the pattern of choosing leaders who are powerful rather than leaders who are wise. And how do we find the leaders who are wise? Where do we, if they don't exist, how do we create them? By becoming more mature ourselves, as you were all saying. That's the only way. So I'll stop now.
One of the things that we write in our book, The Underground Railroad, is that we're all swimming in the water of what's right, real, and true is white and male. And the problem with that is it often takes nature and God out of the equation. And what we do then with that yardstick is we measure everything, even who we consider who's privileged and who's not, who's wealthy and who's not. And one of the things I say is I really don't like the word privilege because I think that it's not privilege to be disconnected from your heart. It's only privilege is we're using their yardstick. And so we keep creating the same systems over and over, using the same yardstick to measure what we're doing. Like right now, there's a big movement in creating anti-racist organizations. And I always say a healed person would never claim anti-anything. And so we're creating it still in that old yardstick. And it's time for us to create a new yardstick. You know, what do we collectively decide that is wealthy? What do we collectively decide is success or is privileged or is whatever it is? And not just realize how, and like you were saying, I think, Anne, how unconsciously we fall into those belief systems.
I think also it has to look at the philosophy that guides this society, which for 300 years has been scientific materialism, with no God, no soul, no consciousness in the universe, no consciousness in the earth at all, no sentience, and seeing us as the only conscious beings, which has given us a huge inflation. We think we're the bee's knees, and to use that old-fashioned expression, and we're hugely inflated in the sense of who we are and what we're doing on the earth. Nobody's asking why we're here on the earth and what we're serving. So until we get our values sorted and get free from this dreadful philosophy or ideology and get back to the sense of the sacred, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think we do recreate it over and over again, but I think that that there are people who are doing it. I don't think we can say nobody. You know, I think about my grandmother, who this African-American woman who was raised in Georgia and talks about, like, you know, how her parents talked about the birds and the plants and how they made their own plant medicine. And, you know, I think that we forget it in European-centric cultures, that there are other cultures that are still moving and who have kept these and are still there because we haven't paid attention to us, you know? And, you know, even in the practices so often will include Asian practices, will include Native American practices, will include all these different cultures. And so often we leave out Africa, which is the birthplace of all of us. And, you know, somebody once said to me, you can never survive or strive as a culture as long as you're continuing to hate your mother. And the African woman is the mother, the birthplace of it all. And so that piece about how do we open and increase more and more pieces of the truth. You know, in integral theory, Ken Wilber says nobody can be wrong all of the time. And so, like, how do we grow our capacity to hold more and more pieces of the truth in our assessment of what is true?
This conversation is really good. Thank you for both of your perspectives. And this conversation is leading me to want to take everything that we've just spoken about. We've spoken about the yardstick, that everything is good, real, and true, is white and male, which we're like, no more of this yardstick. And also this scientific materialism, that we're separate from nature, separate from God. And also recognizing that cultures who have not been holding this yardstick and who have always felt connected to nature are still here. And so I sense that the feminine in men, in women, the feminine essence in all is connected to this essence that the indigenous cultures have been holding. These cultures connected to earth. This is the natural feminine, the empathy, the oneness, all of this. How do we create spaces or structures or processes for this feminine essence to become valued and for it to be what creates, what guides our leadership?
Why don't we ask the indigenous people to come into a meeting and advise us and tell us how we should set up a new structure? Because we haven't really got a proper democracy. We've got half a democracy. And maybe they could advise us to how to expand it and deepen it. They've got the wisdom of thousands of years behind them. They've kept their connection with the ancestors. They've respected the earth, and they've respected women because they've always included women in their councils. So why don't we do that? I wonder if that could be an idea to suggest with Jim, that we have a circle of indigenous people and women and men sitting together saying, what can we do? Because we have to be humble enough to know that there is something that needs to be done.
And I think that that we have to co-create it together. You know, it's like we all carry a piece of it. And so it's not, the indigenous people don't have all of it themselves either, right? Like, and so many of them have bought into the what's right, real, and true too. And so their communities have been touched by that as well. And so how do we lean in together to remember, to help each other remember the truth of who we are? And, you know, I love in Bill Plotkin's book, Soulcraft, one of the things he talks about is that the ascending journey to spirit is a masculine journey. It's why we have more ministers and priests that are men than women. And the descending to the soul is a feminine journey. It's why we have more witches than warlocks. And he says that we all are initiated through the descent, through the descending through the feminine. Mm-hmm. And so to me, part of the question about what the feminine has to offer is that piece with initiation. So if the ascending journey to spirit, if the people who are holding those places have a good balance a balance with the feminine, then they won't block the descent, they won't block initiation. And the same is true with the feminine. So often, if you have a good balance with the masculine, when you go into descent, you know you can't do it alone. You need to have guides and elders to take you on the journey. And so you don't block your own descent or don't block someone else's descent. And so it's working on each of our balance between the masculine and the feminine so we can hold this journey together. And I think one of the things that we've left out of it is we so have this myth of independence. You know, this whole idea that we can do this thing, and I think I heard you speak of this one time as well, is that we think we can even be independent, which I don't think it's true. I think we're always all dependent. We're walking on the same earth, we're breathing the same air, we're drinking the same water. And so the question then becomes, if we're standing in scarcity and lack, we're in codependence. Or if we're standing in love and abundance, we're in interdependence. And so how do we move out of that codependency, even with the divine? I hear so much people have the codependency with the divine, this relationship that's not healthy. You know, I grew up with some of that in my family. Yeah.
And I think that brings us back to our mission, you know, that interdependence. Like, we are a global sisterhood. We are all in this together. We share the same earth, we share the same water, we share the same air. How can we remember, you know, and really deeply remember? Because I carry this and I also forget. And I want to project out, I want to externalize, I want to not take responsibility. And really it's here, it's my remembering, and it's all of our rememberings. And so how do we help others take responsibility for their experience? You know, there's a beautiful Lakota woman that talked about the closest word that they have to the word devil is really this idea of being like the best.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
Like this individual idea of being outstanding. And that was the closest word that they had to the word devil. And it's because that they knew that if we were to step outside this arena of interdependence, that we would arrive in a place that was hell, that was unhealthy. And so how do we get back to this place of healthy, as we live upon this earth and we breathe the same air and we drink the same water? It's really this like deep process of remembering. So I'd love for you each to share about what that looks like. How do we remember? How do we connect? How do we come home to this idea of interdependence?
It's very difficult because it was lost so long ago. I'm thinking back to the Greek philosophers and how they remembered by making the journey in a cave, what was called incubation. They stayed 3 or 4 days in the cave, waiting for the vision or the dream. And then they went on a journey, a shamanic journey into the inner realms where they were taught by beings there. So that there was the opening to the other dimensions to be taught. And they gave them the laws that they brought back for the cities and their communities. So all that went with religion because religion stamped out all forms of shamanic communication. And we lost that sense of belonging to the universe and belonging to deeper dimensions which have given birth to us and brought us to this planet and told us why we're here, so to speak. What is our task being on this planet? What are we meant to do? It's certainly not getting rich and famous and getting on Facebook all the time. It's something absolutely other that we need to pay attention to. What has been missing and how can we supply or rediscover or reconnect with what has been missing? That I see is the great question of today, because without that, we're going to go on our blind journey, guided by this or that politician or leader who has no wisdom but is only interested in power. So to break this spell, because it is a spell, we really have to ask ourselves, what am I missing and what do I really want? What is my greatest longing during my life?
Yeah, we were doing a wisdom series on forgiveness just a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that came out of my mouth at one point was, I said, I need you to see me. And I said, no. I don't need you to see me. I need you so I can see me. And it's that we have forgotten. And one of the things I love about Circle is that Circle is a place that you not only can remember that we belong to each other, but that we are each other. In Charlottesville, when that guy was driving the car and plowing through the crowd, I realized I am that person. Now it may show up in a little different way with me, but we are each other, and that until we really get that saving the world, we can't save ourselves by saving the world. It only works the other way. When we save ourselves, we save the world. And that, we don't want to know. I think we're afraid to know that we're that powerful. It's like, I have to take it back to me, constantly. And part of that is because healing and growth is transcend and include. So we can work on an ethnocentric layer or on a global layer, but if we're not doing the personal healing, trauma wants to be healed and it'll float to the top to sabotage the work that we've done. And so us each taking on our own journey is so important.
Isn't that the African expression Ubuntu that?
Yes.
That you've expressed it perfectly.
Yeah.
Is that you exist because I exist because you exist.
Yes,
So
it's that our humanity is tied to each other.
Yeah.
And I even love the Ubuntu and the Namaste together, because we are embodied humans as well as divine spirits and beings. And so
That's
it's the
right.
balance between those two.
I'd like to bring in quantum physics here, because I think this is another way that we could bring everybody together, because the latest discoveries, not the ones I spoke about, not the materialist ones, but the latest discoveries are bringing through the idea that at the very deepest level of what they call the Planck units, that's way below the atom, we are connected with each other. everything is connected. We're connected to everything in the earth, and we're connected to all the great galaxies, 200 billion of them or whatever there are. So that is something that could spread out, I think, through community, that we're connected, we can't avoid it. And so how can we make this more conscious? How can we live it more consciously? And dividing ourselves into nations, which had to go through that stage, but we don't need to put the emphasis there so much. We need to put more of the emphasis on how can we come together to look after the earth, all of us, with our different gifts, because every nation has a different gift and every individual has a different gift, a priceless gift. So how can we bring all these gifts together and bring them to the stage where we put them in service of the greater life or the planet or of the trees or whatever you want to choose as the element which you will serve, because we each have a specific way of serving. Some are quite, some are very good with children, some are good with animals, some are good with plants. We can develop all these gifts, but see them as something coming from every individual in the world, all 7.5 billion of us, to build this great connection through the wisdom of quantum physics, as coming to us as a revelation. This is as great a revelation as we've ever had in the past in our religions, because it's really showing how we do belong with each other and how we are connected with the earth and with the cosmos, and how we're star beings in our essence. That's another thing, not through quantum physics, but we come from the stars and we go to the stars, and we are starry beings. This is where we've come from. This is what we are in our essence. And that's such a marvelous idea to give children, even to give them the name of a star.
And I love, you're asking about the feminine, Lauren, about what the feminine has to offer. And part of what I think it does in connecting that piece is that one of our basic needs is belonging. And the feminine knows that we're birthed from the collective. There's, I think John Powell said, we're even born attached to somebody, right? We're birthed from the collective. And if we understand that when you're birthed from the collective, we're all coming from the same stardust, same place, and we return to the same place, how can you not belong? And starting there, that changes everything. It changes my space in the room. I always tell people, don't sneak out of a workshop. You matter here. Say goodbye. That relational piece, you matter. And so that's the piece I think that we aren't sharing with each other, because we so witness on a daily basis this belief of disposable people. And if you're disposable, that means I am too. And there's something in us that know that.
This conversation is reminding me of a book I read by Starhawk. Who loves Starhawk here? I'm such a fan of her work. And we're speaking about circle. We're speaking about the interconnectedness. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I had this craving for what I was calling a prophetic fiction. And so I made a post on Facebook and I said, does anybody know a prophetic fiction? And about 10 people recommended The Fifth Sacred Thing by Starhawk. And what I love about this book, and especially during the pandemic, it was a dying culture, a dying world. There was pandemics, man-made in this book, pandemics going around. And there was this community of people forming that were living this principle of we are all connected and we are sacred, and the earth is sacred, and the earth has intelligence. The earth is speaking to us. The wind is a sacred element, the air, the earth, the fire, the water, and then spirit. And they had a council that led their town. So they would have a council meeting and they'd have different members who represented the elements and spoke from tuning in. Their job in life was to tune into this element, and any decision they made was not just on behalf of humans. Each element had an opportunity to speak. This is what we say. This is the essence needed here. And so they made every decision, not only thinking about what was best for each other, but bringing in the wisdom of the elements and the earth into account. And, maybe some would say we're far away from that in our democracy. But as Juanita, you were saying earlier, we are the ones that elect the leaders. It's us. And so how do we form these councils? And as you were saying, Anne, if all women got together and said, enough of this, how do we, I just want to encourage the empowerment for all of us to know that we ourselves can create a community of women and do this work. We can do this work, and men can do this work too. We can do it together. And so I just wanted to pass it on to you, Anne or Juanita, to elaborate in any way you feel inspired here.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Lauren, and you speak very movingly there. I think that this, to me, I said to my daughter, who's about in her 50s now, I said to her yesterday, this is the time we've been waiting for. This is the time my mother thought was coming in her lifetime, but it's coming now. And I said, you must be prepared. You must not be afraid of dying, whatever happens. If there's an atom bomb dropped, don't have fear, have courage. And I think that this is something for all of us now, that this is a crucial time. We cannot go on witnessing these atrocities happening. We cannot go on seeing human lives wiped out when we are part of these lives that are being wiped out, and they are part of us. So I do think that somehow or other we have to come together. And I think women, not excluding men, but I think that women can do something unique and different, which has never been done before. And I don't know, connect with it. You've got an organization which is connecting women all over the world already, which is marvelous. Maybe it can be expanded with other ones without complicating things, without getting hierarchy. Must avoid hierarchy at all costs, but have this based on really just love of the planet, as if we were listening to the voice of the earth. And as you said, really, and noting what she wants, because it certainly isn't what we've got now. And all the involvement in politics and all the arguments that are going on, these just have to be stopped and discarded and disregarded, because they just are so much rubbish that we spend our lives on when we really need to be focused on something much, much deeper and broader.
About 8 years ago, I think it was, Tennyson asked me, so what question, if you knew it, would change your life forever? And I said, oh my God, I don't know. And then he says, okay, so what question could you live into for about 2 to 3 years? And the question I've been living into for probably about 7 years now is, what if I really did believe that everything was in divine order? How would I treat people differently? How would I move through the world differently? What questions would I ask differently? I think because we've taken nature so often, and nature is us. Let's be clear. We are nature, has taken it out of the equation. We have forgotten we can't see the beauty or the divine order of things. And it's not just divine when it's good. It's divine when it's things that we think are awful and horrible. One of my teachers said to me, the universe doesn't make judgments of good or bad. It's just exact. It just responds in an exact way. And we get to choose whether we do it the easy way or the hard way. And we've just collectively have continued to choose the hard way. And, and we wait until we even have whole languages around it, like no pain, no gain. We have all this stuff that we've set up to insist on doing it that way. But what if we decided we didn't want to do it that way anymore? According to the Dagmar medicine wheel, I'm a water spirit. And so I bring the medicine of forgiveness and reconciliation to the world. And for the past 20 years, I have not facilitated a retreat where it hasn't rained. Because the rain shows up to help me, because it knows that people need help going there, right? And holding it. And it just is, we have forgotten that it doesn't have to be so complicated. The elements for the wheel, for the dagger wheel, are fire, water, nature, mineral, and earth. And it's said that we're each born under a particular element. And that's part of the gift that we bring.
Mine is fire.
Yeah. Love it.
Okay.
So, to wrap up this conversation, I want us to really be able to like feel into and paint a picture, perhaps, of what's possible for us, of what we can bring forth. And so, I want to ask each of you, Lauren, you're included in this, to bring forth a vision, as Anne talks about, a new myth, so we can weave these new myths, these new stories on earth.
I don't really know what I can add. I certainly feel that the revelation is coming through now and that people are responding to it. I'm being asked to talk a lot about it at the moment, really. And I think that you all put it so beautifully. It's all there, I think, in what we've said today. We don't need more than what we've said, probably, if we bring it all together and look at what's been said in the recording. And I think definitely we're supposed to be ascending to a new level, the 5th level out of the 3rd in the universe, so to speak. So we're being helped by beings beyond our material dimension. We're being helped to make this ascension. And I think we can do it. I have great trust and hope that we can do it if there are enough of us who come together, who hold this vision, and who in our own specific lives, in the way we're doing, in the way Juanita's doing it in her life, and Lauren and Shana in theirs, you are very good at bringing people together, all 3 of you. For me, it's a bit late, but I'm speaking from my long experience of life, and that's my gift. So I think that somebody's mentioned Jean Houston and Annalise Smithson, and those are 2 other women who are very much on this wavelength and who are working to create this new vision in their trilogy of books which they're publishing. So I think really that's all I have to say. And all through the night, I pray to the Holy Spirit for guidance and help. And I cry for those who are suffering in Ukraine, because it's unbearable to be experiencing what they're experiencing, losing everything from one day to another, everything except perhaps the child they're carrying. We haven't had to go through this, thank God. But all this has come about, as Juanita says, through wrong thinking. We've been taught the wrong things by our religions mainly, but also by this ridiculous science. And we need to jettison the ideas and the beliefs that no longer serve us. That's another aspect of this work. We need to formulate what they are and then throw them out and say, that's enough, we don't need them anymore, and create new formulations of what we do need.
I think what comes to mind for me is just love. You know, I think I'm just a believer that at the end of the day, love always wins. And now that doesn't mean that there's not pain and hurt that happens. And I have to think of Cleveland, Christina, is that her name? Cleveland. God is a Black woman who says, who else is going to love you, or who's going to tell you the truth and love you up at the same time? And it's this piece of like, how do we get more and more honest with each other? Because love does that. You know, my co-author of The Underground Railroad, one of the things Amy said is that her own healing as a white woman, one of the things that has been hard is facing the fact, she says that she has been a purveyor of half-truths and willful not seen. And so how do we lean more and more into love and the truth?
I really appreciate that. That's been what's on my heart lately, is how I can be more and more honest with myself primarily, and then leaning into that. And what I'll offer is what's helped me lean into truth and lean into honesty. And that is cultivating a relationship with the great mother, as I call her, the divine feminine, the goddess, who for so many thousands of years within our Western culture has been forgotten. And so in my new myth, in my vision for humanity, I I implore and I invite reverence of her. And with that, I believe comes reverence of all things, all living beings, men, women, and everybody in between, regardless of how they identify. And with this reverence for the mother and for our earth, I envision a call to the women, to the sisters, to feel their role right now of leadership. If not now, when? And to remember all of the women who have come before, and bearing as one example, our elders who have come before and have done this work in a time when it was harder to do than it is today. They have freed us so much to be able to have these conversations, to be able to have these feelings, to have these awarenesses in a mass way. We're broadcasting right now in a mass way. This wasn't possible when we earned the right to vote. And so how we can remember that we now have power as women to come together, to have these conversations and to create change. And that is the vision that I bring forward.
Thank you so much to all of you for
Thank
your
you.
comments. So Lauren and I are the Global Sisterhood movement. We run the movement. We're stewards of this movement. And really, if you want to join us, if you want to sit in circle with us, we would love to have you. And you can join us at globalsisterhood.org. And thank you, Anne, for being here today. Thank
Well,
you, Juanita, for being here today.
Great privilege. Thank you for organizing it and inviting us.
And Juanita, do you have something to share in our closing before we pass it back to George?
Yes, I'd like to share. It's a poem called The Cloak of Wounds by Timmy Singley. It's actually in our book, and I'll just read it. I have been wearing this cloak of wounds, this veil of pain and suffering passed down from mother to daughter, from sister to brother, from father to son, from grandparent to grandchild. It is a cloak of ancestral past sewn carelessly with wounding words and hints of hurts, stitched half-heartedly with loss and anguish, desperation and rage, tirelessly trimmed with guilt and fear. Today I remove this cloak of wounds, offering this cloak to the water to be washed clean of its fragmented flesh and bloodied bands, offering this cloak to the wind to be blown free of lack and limitations and the ancient dust of illusions, offering this cloak to the fire to be smoked and burned as angered abuse rise to the sky and become the ashes of the past, offering this cloak to the earth to be buried with all the isolation and despair of my people. On this day, I take needle in hand and begin to stitch a new ancestral cloak, a royal robe of power and peace, of undying hope and deep faith. Today, I reach back in time to wind threads of hard-fought freedom with the hand-spun fibers of grace and love. Today, I weave together inspiration, innovation, and imagination with community and cooperation, intermingling wide bands of compassion and golden strands of forgiveness. It is this new ancestral cloak that I will wear from this day forward and pass to my grandchildren, to their grandchildren, and their grandchildren. Today, I will don the new cloak so that our hearts will be healed, so our minds may be cleared as we dance in the shelter of our faith. So my people will be restored, held only by the soul of spirit. Thank you.
Well, it's been it's been a privilege and an honor to listen to your collective voices. I know well that from the chat that I've been following and just from my own reactions, that the four of you demonstrate clearly why there is such a need for the feminine voice in our time. You have asked some really vital and fundamental questions. And I think as well as the content of your dialogue, the spirit of your dialogue is why we create dialogues, so that we can deepen our understanding, touch closer to truth, experience the need for both diversity and humanity. A Buddhist teacher that I know made a statement the other day he said, love in action is compassion. You know? Sorry, you touched me very much. And it's that love in action. It is that compassion that we are most missing today. And you talked about on the question of how do we remember, and you talked about the Greeks and their time in the cave and then their shamanic journeys. I think we can still create those caves if we have the willingness and the courage. I think that each of us, through initiation, Juanita, have that opportunity. Also, we can open the door through some use of plant-based medicines that can cause us to move outside of this physical body and consciousness. I think we get there through deep meditation and prayer, and we also get there through the practice of individual creativity. Those are perhaps some of the caves that we can all visit much more frequently to remember. When you talked about, Lauren, you brought up the idea of connections and bridging. And so it reminds me that tomorrow's program is about bridging the divides. And Pierce Goodwin and Brandon Keating will be talking about some of the work they do in the political sector to bring that about. What else do I want to say? I know Jim is going to come in a minute with a number of questions and thoughts. I think the idea of re-inviting Indigenous voices into the conversation of the time and exploring the value of adding the other piece of democracy that's missing, which we're badly in need of. So these are just some of the thoughts that you have triggered and promoted in me. And I too have been carrying this this burden as I look at what we are doing with this country and the terrible divisions that we have allowed people who have lost their way to inflict upon our society. When I think about what's on the line and what can be lost under the burden of autocracy and other things, and when I see the atrocities that are being committed today under that banner, it brings great sadness. But I think it's moments like this, it's programs like this, it's human beings like the four of you that help us remember. So I thank you. And Jim, do you want to come back in? Before I close, I just want to finish some lines from Alice's piece called Democratic Womanism. She says, to love and adore both female and male, not to mention those in between, to work at keeping the entire community fed, educated, and safe. Those are some goals that we can all contribute to, I think, for the greater good. Jim?
Thank you, George. Thank you for your vulnerability, George, in these matters. And I think what George is embodying right now is, a lot of the grief and sadness and sense of almost despair that all of us are feeling right now, given world events. It seems like everywhere one turns, one is being confronted by, either incompetence or stupidity or undue aggressiveness in high places that is deepening a collective trauma, a collective suffering that all of humanity is caught up in right now. And I think the one point I'd like to just have you all comment on is the insight of the Dalai Lama, where he said, the only thing that's really going to save us now is if women take leadership. And in particular, he said, the women of the West need to take leadership. And so I'd love to have just sort of final comments from each of you as you celebrate International Women's Day. You talk about women's empowerment. I think it would be inspirational for people to hear from each of you how you respond to what the Dalai Lama is saying is the critical factor in whether humanity can bootstrap itself out of the mess that we ever more deeply find ourselves. So I don't know who wants to start.
I'll start.
But I leave it over to you for your four of you have final words, and then we'll close out.
Thank you, Jim. I think a lot about this quote. And I recently actually shared a reel on Instagram speaking about this quote. So it's really up for me right now. I do believe that he is on to something that feels real, but it feels like the incomplete truth to me. I believe women of the West, and there's many women of the West, but in general, many of us have more access to our basic needs being met. More of us have access to being able to speak our voice, but not universally in the West. But I believe that it's the Western women reclaiming our own indigeneity and listening to the voices of the marginalized and also the indigenous people that is going to inform our service. And so while we might be the ones speaking who have platforms to speak, I do believe it's those silent voices that we're listening to. And so in a way, I think it's those voices that will save the world, and it's the women's of the West responsibility to honor those voices.
Thank you.
I think I'll speak. So Mangfu May said, emotions, all over the world, we talk about how emotional women are. And she says, emotions are the gateway to intuition. And I think that there's a place when we learn to listen to that as women, there's a place that we know we can swim into the deep water spaces. I I think one of the things, the healing that has to happen with us is women have been rising, but in so many places, the women have been rising in a very masculine way. And so I would go back to the feminine of how do we invite in all of us more of our balance of the feminine. And it's that, then we have something. Then we have, then it's a real ball game. He's in the center.
I think so.
Yeah, then we'd have a real ball game, folks. Well put. Well put. China, what would you say?
So there's a poem that I wrote on my desk that caught my attention, and I want to share it. She rises with the breath from the ages, tenderness from the earth. Humble and resilient she stands, heart facing east. Despite cold winds, she never thought to close, throw it all away, sink into the quicksand of ancient memory. No, she is here, and forever her essence will be, no longer with shame of her stories, but of her triumphant soul victory.
It's lovely.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
And
I think just two things. First of all, the Dalai Lama said, the time of meditation is over. It's the time of action. And secondly, we had a channeled message years and years ago in the 1950s, I think. And my mother asked, when should we pray? And the answer from Christ came, pray at the hour of the despair of the Son of Man. And that is this hour that we're in now.
Yeah. Well, thank
Jim,
you all for a very, very powerful session on this very important day. One thing that I'd like to now bring in is Leslie Southwick Trask, who has been a constitutive part of Humanity Rising for many, many months. She's been developing with a whole coalition of women's group program called Girl Driven Solutions. They're having a major event tomorrow. So Leslie, why don't you tell us about it? And then we'll finish the program.
Thanks, Jim. I have two thoughts as we do this. The first is that I wish for my granddaughter, Generation Alpha, that being born into the female body is only but one of her distinctions. Because I think that in my generation, it has been a fundamental distinction in order to navigate through the world. And my hope for her is that there are multiplicities of others that define her reach. And the second is that mothers never lose hope. You talk about hopelessness. Mothers never, ever lose hope. We are gifted with absolute, sometimes naivety, sometimes just blind faith. I don't know what you call it, but I've been to the rock face way too many times with children that I love. And there is never a moment of doubt, a moment of powerlessness, a moment of giving in. And I think that's what makes, we can be compassionate and we can be aware and raw with what is happening around the world. But as mothers, we know the strength. We know the bravery. We know the resilience. So I just wanted to hold those two pieces. And when it comes to girl-driven solutions, this is where Jim, as you and I talked about a women's summit, and we said, let's take on something fundamental. And so as we gathered women from around different places of our world, we decided to take on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because we believe they are absolutely detrimental to our future. We don't believe they're guiding us. We believe they're inhibiting us. And we believe they're inhibiting us because they've been designed from a patriarchal, colonized frame of reference. And so what we did is we flipped them to call them GDS as opposed to SDG, and that stands for Girl Driven Solutions. And we leaned into the feminine and said, what do we as women love to do or watch or whatever? And it's makeovers. I don't care. You know what? Everybody says, you know, we have to be serious about this. We have to have the science. We have to, and we go, yeah, we have all of that. But what about a makeover? So we're doing the makeover of the SDGs into girl-driven solutions. And so tomorrow at 4:00 Eastern, we're holding a workshop on creating the persona of SDG 3, her current reality. And we have some emerging elements of this persona already. She's somewhat two-faced. She feels like she's doing something, but really she doesn't believe she's doing anything. It's a whole interesting characteristic of how SDG lives right now in our world. Who is that? What's her persona? And so we're going to be co-creating her persona. And that will then lead us to her makeover. Because what we know about makeovers is that all makeovers are about finding the essence of within to then reflect its beauty in the out. And so we are using designers, we're using regenerators, we're using the science, we're using all of those things that are all in part of a makeover. But man, we're leaning into the feminine. We love our makeover. So if we're going to make over something, let's make over something really important, such as the SDGs. And what better one to start with, as with health and well-being, the actual essence of us being able to sustain in this world. So that's what we're up to, Jim. And I'm going to put it in the chat. Oh, I left the chat. Do you have the,
Yeah, I'll put it in right now.
hold on. I've got it. I think, no, I just lost it. Can you put it in? You can find us on Ubiverse. There's a Zoom link that's there. And you just join us at 4. There's no need to register. It's come one, come all. And it starts at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. We'd love you to come and join us making over SDG 3.
Sure, and I'm just putting it in the chat right now. There we go.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie. You're all invited to join. And then as we close, Shaina, I was very struck by your poem. Could you just give us your poem again, sort of as a little benediction as we close out? And before you do that, I just want to welcome everyone to our after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You're all welcome. It is such a pleasure every day to interact with a global audience. I also want to thank the Sign Network, and I want to thank in particular today Unify, which has been live streaming this program. It is a good thing, as George said, to embody the kind of dialogue and compassion and caring that we've seen on our session today. So I really want to thank you for honoring Women's Day with such a beautiful program. Juanita and Anne and Lauren and Shaina. Thank you very, very much. And now, Shaina, if you could just close us out with your poem.
Might do you one better. Lauren, would you be willing to sing our song?
Oh, even better. There you go.
The Time of the Feminine or Great Grandmothers? Which one?
You pick.
But before people sing, would everybody else turn their microphones off, please?
Grandmothers, mothers, daughters too, circle with us beneath the moon. Grandmothers, mothers, daughters too, circle with us beneath the moon. As sisters we rise with one heart and one prayer. Rosemary, sage from the earth we all share. As sisters we rise with one heart and one prayer. Rosemary, sage from the earth we all share. The heart of the goddess beats in us all. Bare feet on the ground, we call, we call. The heart of the goddess beats in us all. Bare feet on the ground, we call, we call. O healer, O mother, great spirit of truth. Guide and protect us, show us what to do. O healer, O mother, great spirit of truth. Guide and protect us, show us what to do. The pain of this world is the pain of us all. Tears of compassion as raindrops fall. The pain of this world is the pain of us all. Tears of compassion as raindrops fall. Purify us, ignite us, so we may bring peace to the ones who are ill, to the ones who still sleep. Purify us, ignite us, so we may bring peace to the ones who are ill, to the ones who still sleep. Yee-hoo!
Thank you. Global sisterhood, everyone. That's the future. Thank you. That finishes us for today. We'll see you tomorrow here on Humanity Rising. Same time, same station. Bye for now.